having to play the card of like, this is my dad's funeral and like I'm trying to sit with his family.
I really was in shock, very numb, and very much in like, this is just go time, just do and get things done. And I wasn't really connected to my emotions at all.
All eyes are on you, and that's an incredibly vulnerable state to be in. This is something that happened, and this is how it impacted me in that moment. Looking back, it's like, okay, that stuff really wasn't probably that big of a deal, but in the moment, it felt like much more impactful.
Everybody had a story about something he would say that just would make them die laughing.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going.
So we're back.
We're
And
back.
we're back. Clearly, for those who are watching versus just listening to us, we are not in the same location. Um, I live in California. Isaac
I
lives
live in
in Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yep. And so we're going to primarily be doing our podcast remotely. But the first few episodes, he was in town, and we wanted to do them in person to get it started. So curious though, what did you guys think about episode 1 and 2? And we'd love to hear your comments. So, comment on this episode or comment on the episodes before.
If you're on YouTube and can comment.
Yeah, I guess. Or any of the other platforms too. I think that there's what you can leave reviews and things like that. So if you have thoughts, you always can reach us at our social media sites too. So like if you have suggestions or things that you really like or questions or things you're like, I want to know more about this. I mean, we're obviously going to tell the story, and there's some things that we purposefully hold back to tell it in the order that it unfolded for us. But if there's something like, hey, you mentioned this and we want you to dig into that a little bit more, like let us know, because we're gonna eventually put out bonus content and all sorts of good stuff, and keep it moving that way. So you guys
Yeah.
know that all the platforms require some sort of interaction to help us out. So give us the feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I think it's interesting too how we obviously have very different aesthetics in the places we live. My style is quite a bit different than yours, but which you'll see on the video. Um, but yeah. So last time we kind of ended off where we were about to get into what the funeral itself was
Yeah.
like, right?
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
talk
The
about it.
funeral was pretty insane. Like, insane, obviously, because again, we were both just, I cannot believe that this is happening right now. And insane in the sense that it was amazing to
Well,
see
let's
the people who loved Eric.
right. Yeah. Let's real quick, I just kind of had a thought. Let's talk a little bit before we get into the funeral about kind of um I had mentioned previously that I started having like a lot of anxiety and panic attacks and that sort of thing. And I know you kind of were in that same boat, having to deal with all of the logistics of everything as well, but also
Yeah.
still while you're dealing with the grief. And I
I
almost
don't
had forgotten that we had gotten me into the doctor beforehand just to get something to get me through the
know.
funeral.
Yeah. So, and me as well. Although ironically enough, I think I really was in uh my go-to response when dealing with this type, not just like death, but like any sort of like traumatic or intense situation, is in that crisis manager mode. So I really was in shock, very numb, and very much in like, this is just go time, just do and get things done. And I wasn't really connected to my emotions at all. And we'll get more into like when that hit me, because it was very different timing for you and I, which also affected and made it challenging, I think, for you. But we'll talk about that later. So I did. I already had issues with panic attacks in the past. I have, taken anti anxiety medications in the past for panic attacks. I had not had a panic attack for a few years prior to Eric dying. I had been working pretty intensely um, in a specialized type of therapy and was feeling really, really good actually. So I was really frustrated that now I was dealing with this again. Um, However, I didn't have um, a lot of anxiety that I would say those first few weeks for sure. It was a lot of very much numb for me, but it was
Y-
completely different for you. So,
yeah.
talk to us about like you talked about it a little bit in the last episode, and I did feel like you need to go to the doctor. Like this funeral is going to be intense, so let's talk about that part.
Well, it was also interesting for you too because I think you just very much went into like crisis mode, damage control, and you've always kind of been that character in your family as well, where
Hmm.
you've always had to just be the strong one who gets things done um, because no one else would step up to that plate. And I think that in the years following, I've kind of picked up that trait.
Hmm.
After dealing with this kind of major crisis, I've in a lot of other areas of my life become kind of the crisis manager for friends and family, and um, even
It's
at
also
work. Like
yeah, I was gonna
I
say
think
it's
you kind of
also
learn that in our job,
it's a natural part of being an emergency room nurse. Got to be careful to balance that though, because it's not the most fun role to be stuck in all the time.
right? But yeah, I mean, I had mentioned it even like way back in the intro episode about how after he died, like this was, I think I had one panic attack when I was like 10 years old, and that was, and I remember that very clearly because it a bunch of my cousins had come to live with us, and like you know it was a very big change, but also it was one of those things where like being a 10-year-old um and being an only child, I was very used to like having my own space, and then all of a
Hmm.
sudden kids who, quite frankly, like I didn't grow up with my cousins, I didn't really grow up hanging around them that much um in general, and then all of a sudden have these kids which I essentially didn't really know very well suddenly in my space and messing with my
Hmm.
things and like breaking a lot of my stuff, and um I think that was kind of my first moment of being too overwhelmed, but um which
Yeah, that
again
was it's a side story, but it was an eye opener for me too. You know, I think your dad and I had to uh because we recognized that's what was happening, and I think you also felt like you had to be a certain way with them when
mhm,
they were here, or when they were living with us, and so we had to kind of give you permission to just like you can keep doing your own thing, but
mhm.
totally not related. So
Right, sorry, but well, I mean, I was just
it
kind of
is, but it
explaining.
isn't. Hmm.
I had never really understood what that felt like because even in that moment as a 10-year-old, I didn't know what that was until it happened again when during this event when my dad died. I started having them pretty much every day, multiple times a day. It especially, I think it especially started when we had a lot of people around because it
Yeah.
got so overwhelming that this was real. Like I'm actually going through this right now,
Hmm.
and like I remember having a lot of moments where I couldn't breathe and my heart rate was I could feel my heart pounding out of my chest, and like I was kind of doing this with my hands, like squeezing them and trying to figure out some way to soothe myself, and I just couldn't. And you know and I remember you were like, we need to go to the doctor, and that was the first time I think in my entire life that I was like, yes, I need something to help me get through these emotions and deal with them properly. And like I've always kind of had, difficulties with anxiety and overthinking and like being a little bit of a worry wart in general, which I
Yeah.
think I took after my dad. But
Yeah, your dad
Um,
was known as a worrywart from a very young age, which contributed to some of the challenges that he had before his death.
mhm, mhm.
But
But I remember going to the doctor and like trying to explain how I was feeling, and it's one of those things where I think even in that moment, like this was kind of my first interaction with going to a doctor or a professional to help with mental health type issues or anxiety, depression, anything like that.
mhm,
And I think for a lot of people, kind of go through that experience of um, downplaying how they're feeling or like downplaying what's actually going on behind the scenes or because they think that maybe it's not quite valid or they're
being
playing it
dramatic.
up in their head or being dramatic. Um,
Mhm,
and I think it's important just in general what I've learned over the years and doing bouts of things like therapy or talking to psychiatrists, doctors, and all that stuff about help for that sort of thing is to be incredibly and like brutally honest
mhm.
about just how overwhelming those feelings can be, because if you're not, this is often why, like, speaking from a medical perspective, this is often why people are prescribed certain medications that don't work very well for them. And it's because they're not actually honest about how they're feeling. And if you're not truly brutally honest about what's going on, the doctor's going to get a different idea as to what you need. And I think this was kind of my first experience with that because my feelings were so incredibly intense, but I think I kind of, I wasn't being 17. I wasn't really aware how to be how to express the need that I needed for something. And so they
Mhm.
gave me fairly like very mild
Yeah.
anti-anxiety meds. I
Well,
think it was
because
hydroxyzine.
yeah, I mean, you're a teenager, so they're not
Hmm.
gonna give you a benzo or like a Xanax or Valium or that sort of thing. Typically, I think
Obviously.
that they might have if they had understood how intense it was. But yeah, I mean, they're gonna start with something mild.
And like they kind of would take I remember um that kind of situational anxiety med would kind of like take the edge off, but it wasn't nearly enough to like prevent any of the panic attacks or like any of the kind of debilitating anxiety in those moments, which there might be something to be said about um allowing yourself to feel those emotions in order to heal from them, which I think is also very valid. But in certain cases, especially in this, like I didn't even think I was going to be able to go to the funeral, which I knew I needed
Mhm.
to because I would never forgive myself if I didn't. But
Mhm.
like that was kind of the level that I was at, is I didn't even think I would be able to walk through the doors. And
Well, I think
obvi-
there's it's interesting because of the funeral part of it, or and we call it a memorial in our faith, but you know that you're going to be the center of attention. All
Mhm.
of these people are going to be watching you. They're going to be
Yeah.
watching your reactions. So there's an added pressure to that. And you're already like not sure if you can handle it.
Mhm. Right. And yeah, and so like I had those medications and they helped kind of take the edge off, but it in those moments of having that level of like being so overwhelmed, um it never really quite felt like enough, which sometimes in those situations you just have to work through it and allow yourself to feel those things and allow yourself to break down in front of people and whatnot. But that's also a very scary and vulnerable place to be in. It feels very, very uncomfortable, um to even in a situation where you have every right to be not okay. My dad just died. We're going to his funeral. I have every right to break down and have panic attacks and like be have debilitating emotions.
Mhm.
Um, but it feels so uncomfortable because, like you said, all eyes are on you, and that's an incredibly vulnerable state to be in. Um, uh, and then it sparks a lot of fear in within yourself because I don't know if it's a fear of rejection or a fear that your emotions aren't valid or any of those things, but having all of those eyes on you and seeing you in your most vulnerable state is can be very terrifying. And that's
It's a fear
often,
of loss. It's a fear of loss of control
yeah,
is really what it is.
yeah.
Anxiety is
And
it has to do with control.
I think judgment, which again seems a
Mhm.
little bit absurd because it's like, again, in a funeral or in a case like that, you have every right to be not okay. You should not be okay, quite frankly. But it still feels like when you have all those eyes on you, it still feels like you might be judged for,
Oh, a hundred
for
percent
losing
people judge.
control. Hmm.
100% people judge, and they'll judge the other direction too. It's not with ill intention either. I mean, we're human beings. It's just how we operate, right? But there's judgment the other way of I was so numb and so in shock. And again, this person I'd been with for a very long time, everyone knew how incredibly close we were, and I was numb and had and I do go into like a lockdown with my emotions. Um, and so 100% I'm sure there were people that came to that memorial service and went, well, she doesn't seem like she's upset enough about that. You know what I mean? Um, but I mean, we'll get more into that when you talk about like the anxiety too, with the things that I don't think I really mentioned earlier, that were really very stark things in my memory from this period of time that I will never ever forget those images in my head is the two, you talked about, we were both devastated. Uh I had obviously, and so had your dad, very much worked hard to ensure that you weren't exposed to devastating things, on a regular basis. So you didn't have a lot of things that had devastated your life. There's one moment when your great grandpa died, who you were super close to. Never forget that. Literally, you 14 lying across his body in the hospital, sobbing because that was your first experience losing somebody. And then we talked a little bit about like when you heard the word autopsy on the phone and realized he's dead. And I will never forget the look on your face. So, like, I'm listening to this guy, the sergeant, tell me things, which obviously I don't remember, about like logistical stuff. And all I'm seeing is you just completely crumble and like drop onto the stairs and fall apart. And I'm on the phone and I have to like finish getting this information. And it was such a helpless feeling because I couldn't take it away from you. I couldn't help you in that moment. And then the other very stark memory for me was the viewing, which we talked about in the last episode. There's this moment after everybody else had come in and we were still viewing, and this was I think kind of in the beginning part of when everyone was starting to view, and I don't know, there's like this somber mood and you're just kind of sitting with the heavy weight of it. And you kind of had walked up to your dad again and you were standing in front of him and looking at him. And I remember, I don't know, I was standing, there's like chairs, and it creates like an aisle, kind of
Hmm.
like when you're at a wedding, which is really weird. Um, I was standing in the aisle talking to somebody. I don't know who it was. So someone was standing next to me. And I just remember you turning around and this look of complete devastation on your face. And it's a look I've never seen. I never have seen on your face. I never saw it before that, and I'd never seen it since. It was just this complete look of devastation. So, to say that you were having very intense feelings is an understatement because I could see it and I could feel it from you.
Well, and I think I've always, people who know me, I've always been somebody who has very intense feelings in general. Like I'm a feeler. Um, I have very strong feelings of like love and care for the people that I care for, and um, just in general. And like I've learned over the years how to be more in control of my emotions in general, but I also recognize the importance of like I said, allowing yourself to feel things and allowing yourself um to be okay with more intense emotion, which again I've learned a lot more since those events. But even as like a child, I think you always kind of knew that like I have always had like a very intense love for people that I'm
Hmm.
around, and like my friends and my family and all of that stuff. I think generally demonstrated by my reactions to loss, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
but
think we need
yeah,
to
this
just like
was
get into the. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say we should really get into like the actual funeral because, again, not to like discount the things we're talking about, they're important, but
yeah.
I'm sure people are waiting to hear like what happened at this memorial service, funeral service.
Well, so first and foremost, like we didn't really take
What do
much
you?
part in organizing the funeral.
That is true.
We luckily had a very great support system, through our
Uh,
congregation,
yep, our faith. They
who
just
who's
took over. Yeah.
yeah, they stepped up, they took over, they basically made all the plans. They made the plans for the I forget what it's called, but like the after event where we eat food and like sit in his
Yeah.
memory,
It's
and
just it's
or
like I don't. It's like an after event. I don't even know what they call it.
yeah, I don't remember, but they a lot of people came in and made food for that whole event and everything too. But like we didn't have to do any of the planning pretty much. I do remember asking one of the people from our congregation to do the memorial service for us.
Hmm.
And he gave a great
He did an amazing job.
service. He did really great. Um, but I think the thing that I remember most is just knowing that I remember getting dressed up that day and thinking to myself, like, how am I going to face this? Like, I have no idea. I was already imagining myself, walking through the doors, and I just knew that there was no way I was going to be able to keep it together whatsoever. Um, and then I remember pulling up into the parking lot. I remember being dropped off at the doors and stepping out of the car. And we were
We
actually
were the last
we
people
were
there.
we were running late. We were the last people there. We were running late.
Hmm.
And so of course, like we walk in the door and it's all
So
eyes on us.
yes, and let's back up for a second, just before we get to the like walking in part. So for me, again, I'm still very numb, very much in shock, very much like help. Not I didn't. We didn't have to do anything, but of course, like there's still logistical things. So like finding a picture, finding um uh a like I think we had to put together some, or I needed to give them some sort of like pictures for a picture board or something like that. Um
Oh yeah,
and
I almost completely forgot about that whole process the week prior of like having to go
mhm,
through hundreds and hundreds of pictures and looking at my dad and like, oh
mhm.
man, I completely forgot about that whole part.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then also like figuring out which, so they have a huge picture of him when you walk in the door, um of his memorial service. And so trying to figure out like which picture do we want to put there that's like just the essence of who he is, right? Because the one thing about your dad is he hated taking pictures. I was actually very shocked at how many pictures, and we still only have like a small handful of videos of your dad. But even those, like, I'm shocked that we have them because your dad was so anti photo. Like, he hated getting his picture taken. And
I
so
think
I was, go ahead.
sorry. I think part of that too is like with his kind of social anxiety,
Which
he
we didn't know about necessarily.
and he was a photogenic person in a lot of ways, but he never
If he
thought he did.
smiled.
So he just yeah, but he just felt like every time we would take a picture, he always felt so awkward, and he would clamp up, and he would like almost frown because he didn't
Yeah.
he didn't know how to smile in a way that seemed genuine, so he just like didn't do it in a picture. Like he had a great smile, and we have like a few more candid
You
pictures
had
of
to
him that
catch
are
him,
smiling.
like, where he
Right.
wasn't. Yeah.
But if you look at him trying to smile, like it it looks so forced and bad because he
Mhm.
just I think he always felt so awkward, so he just would
Yeah.
always he'd look at the camera and go, and just frown and like
I know. Yeah. Yeah, he always looked like he was cranky.
which he wasn't because
Um,
we'd all be laughing and whatever, and then you pull out the camera and you'd be like
yeah,
and
yeah,
immediately start frowning.
he hated taking this picture. Um, maybe if he had known, what was in store, he would have been a little bit more willing with that.
I don't
Because
think so.
probably not. But
He was
I
so
tell you,
stubborn in some ways.
he was so stubborn. But those photos, I mean, the one thing I will say that has changed since he died, and I've always been a person that takes photos to a certain extent in video and a little bit. Um, but I've never been a huge fan of like posed photos. I'll do
Hmm.
occasionally. We would get occasional family pictures like done professionally. And but I really, really, really am drawn to candid photos. And that became even more clear after he died because the photos that I look at that bring me the most joy are the candid moments that we caught
Hmm.
on camera that weren't posed, because the posed ones, I don't remember what was happening in that moment. The posed ones
Hmm.
are we sat and posed for a photo. Even like if
Hmm.
we were doing something like some sort of event together and we all just posed together, it's like, oh yeah, we were at that event. But like when you catch candid moments, it vividly brings those memories back. And now I know that like you and when your cousin lived with us after your dad died for a little while, you guys would get really super annoyed with me when we'd be on trips, and I'd be like, but I want another picture, or I want this video, or I'd be like catching things like when you guys weren't planning, like aware of it. But it was such a big deal because they it just you don't realize how important they are until you don't have that person anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I kind of I remember in those moments of like I would always get really annoyed with you because it always felt so forced in the ways that like a lot of times you'd be like, all right, now let's take a picture when we're in the middle of doing something fun, and it's like, okay, now we have to stop what we're doing and like pose for a picture, and um, which
well,
I've come
not
around on because
yeah,
I've come around on because like I recognize the importance of that stuff a lot more now. But I
yeah.
think also just being a teenager and like I think I would have been a lot more okay with more candid pictures all the time. But
No, that
it
was
was the
actually the
moments where I was
problem.
like,
No, that was actually the problem is I would just take pictures and you guys would get upset because you're like, we didn't pose for those, or like I look like crap in that picture or whatever. And I didn't care about that. I just wanted to capture the moment. And then it'd be like, okay, well, let's take a picture then together. And then you guys would be annoyed because then we had to stop and like pose for a picture. Because I caught candid pictures all the time and I have some really fun little videos. But those were the things you got the most annoyed with me about. Even though I explained to you like my desire and why I felt compelled to have them. But again, off topic a little bit. Um, Back to the funeral.
yeah, sorry. What do you remember that morning?
I remember also feeling a big, like a lot of dread. Um, and I felt a lot of pressure around the I definitely knew that I was going to be judged. And this is just because of the family environment that I grew up in, the dynamics of my family and some of my extended family. Um, I knew that there was going to be judgment either way. And I also knew that because I had a tendency to go into this like crisis manager mode and lock down my emotions and be very private with my emotions, which have changed a lot since your dad has died. But at the time, that was the mode I operated in. I had a lot of dread around knowing that I was pretty sure that I was not going to have much of a reaction at the funeral, and not that anyone would ever say anything to me. I do know that. It's not like I was worried, but I just, you know, in the back of your head that like there are people being like, oh, well, like she didn't even cry at the funeral. I felt dread that like just, and it's not that I thought that anybody was ever going to like come up to me and be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you weren't upset at your husband's memorial service or funeral or whatever. It's just this subconscious knowing of like, I know these people that are going to be here. The ones, and now I don't care. Like it's a whole nother topic. I'm pretty disconnected from my family, but at the time, I do remember feeling dread. There were also going to be a lot of my family members that I didn't talk to for various reasons. I've been pretty much no contact with my mom for at least a good 10 years. Maybe like extremely minimal contact. Um, Basic text exchange. I honestly didn't really initiate them very, very rarely if I had a
And,
question about anything.
and
Um,
so
so
if
I,
I'm hearing you,
oh,
sorry, if I'm hearing you right, so what you're saying, a lot of the dread that you were feeling from that day was from facing your family and people that you felt like were going to judge you for the situation and not necessarily like the event itself, which is interesting.
yeah. And my family dynamic, which I'm sure we'll have an episode about it at some point in the future because it's an interesting thing. But I don't necessarily personally feel, and I'm not going to say that that's necessarily their intention because I can't speak for them. But based on my experiences growing up, I don't feel like all of my family's intention in coming to the memorial service was genuine, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell exactly what somebody's intentions
Right.
are in that phase, and like, and generally, especially in that case, because it's like your family better than anybody else outside of this, but
Well, I know my
it
experience. And so
right, yeah.
it's not, again, like I said, it's not that I discount that they maybe thought that or that their intentions were good, but also I I know what I've experienced and I know how they behave.
Well,
So uh,
and I think too, given how he died and given the suspicions that we had of how he died, I think you were especially worried of judgment because, and again, we haven't really fully gone into the all of the results of the autopsy and exactly what our
well, we
theory
didn't
is
know at
as to
that
how
time
he died,
either.
and we didn't know yet, but we had suspicions and we had like our idea of what it was. And I think part of that fear for you was, you felt like you were going to be judged, um, that like, oh, look at her, her perfect little life isn't so perfect after all kind of deal. Um,
And I've never claimed my life to be perfect. That's been the problem.
right,
So,
right.
but yeah, so I
And
haven't
that, and
dread.
that was a fear that you had, which, you know, again, given from the experiences you had with
It
certain
wasn't.
people.
It wasn't a fear. It was a knowledge that that was going to be going through some people's minds. It wasn't a fear. I knew that when you know someone and you've grown up in a certain environment, you just know how things are. So it wasn't a fear. It was just a dread of having to deal with it and hoping that I didn't have to deal with it in any sort of like extended way. So I had a little dread going into it. I also, so one of the amazing things that really just, I think, blew my mind. I don't know how you felt about it, but there were, I think they counted about 300 people at your dad's memorial. And
I think
that's
it
a
was a
lot of
little over, yeah.
attention. That's a lot of attention and a lot of people. And we knew that there were gonna be, a decent amount of people there.
Where we had the funeral could barely fit everyone.
Yeah.
That was how many people showed up.
Um, I know the count came out like right around 300. And and it, in one hand, I was so incredibly thankful and grateful because your dad was so loved, and I wish he would have known that about himself. Like, he had people that flew in from other states
Yeah,
to come.
from his work, he had people come in because he traveled a lot for work, and he went to Pittsburgh and places in Canada and Iowa and like Illinois and all of these different places, North Dakota,
West
and he
Coast,
had
East
yeah,
Coast.
and he had people fly in from. I think. Well, I know he had people from Pittsburgh. I think he had people from like San Francisco fly in,
Yeah, there
or
was some
somewhere
of
in California.
Washington, West Coast. There was,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, there was people
and
that
so
came
like
from quite a ways away.
right, and not just it was an amazing sight, and it felt there was that aspect of it that it felt we felt very supported as well because there were
Yeah.
so many people that loved him and that loved us subsequently.
Yeah,
Um,
so going to that point of walking in the door, so we literally are the last people walking into the memorial, and the goal was to get there before everyone else got there because
so
I
that not
didn't
everyone was staring at us.
right.
Yeah.
But I'm habitually late in general. I have, challenges with that. And then on top of it, it's just, you
I'll
know,
say.
everything, I don't know, it's just I feel like in those types of situations, it feels like everything that could go wrong goes wrong. I remember feeling really like a high sense of I need to have like a new dress and a specific outfit for this service, which I'm never gonna wear it again. Like I never wore that again. I thought maybe I would because we dress up for our religious services. And so I was like, oh, I'll buy a new dress. I can wear it again in the future. I'm not putting that back on. I never put that back
No,
on. I never
no.
I never wore that again. But yeah, so for me walking in the door, it was a little awkward because we were the last people walking in and we were sitting right in the front row. So
Yeah,
we
for
had
some reason, I don't know if it was planned that way or
it
like
is
if it
always
was just
it's
because we were
always
the last one.
no, it's always planned that way.
Yeah,
Every
it
family
was
always sits in the front.
right, and so I think the one thing that I remember for some reason, uh, that I remember the most about walking into the funeral was I remember walking through the doors, and there was this guy that like I was maybe acquaintances with,
Mhm.
like we had mutual friends, but like I never hung out with him ever outside of when my friends invited him somewhere or I was it wasn't like we had any sort of relationship, but I think just given the news and given the kind of tragedy of the situation, um I remember walking in and like he was standing near the door and we made eye contact, and it was weird seeing the look of like pity in his eyes, but not in a bad context. I think people pity tends to have like a negative connotation, I guess,
Mhm.
but like the look of like compassion and like sadness on my part for me, because
Mhm.
he never had even met my dad, but he was there for us. He was there for me.
Yeah.
Um,
And a lot
and
of people were. Yeah.
right, and seeing that was a very weird moment for me, because I was already like breaking down as I was walking in the door, and then
Mhm.
seeing somebody that I didn't really know that well again looking at me in that in such a vulnerable state.
Mhm.
It kind of made me realize, and I kind of wanted to touch on this in general, of like looking back, among my friends and among kind of our congregation, and like even kind of surrounding communities, like all these different communities, like that was, it's weird to say it, but the whole event of my dad dying was a tragedy. Like in the most deep sense of the word, teenage
Mhm.
kid losing his father very suddenly, no real knowledge of actually what happened. He just was up and dead, you know,
Yeah.
and like thinking about it from that context of like, you hear about those sorts of events and you're like, oh, that's a tragedy, but being the one that it happens to and then actually saying that feels so weird, because it's just, at this point, like, it's just my life, that's what happened to me. But like using that word, it seems so weird, and I think that was kind of the moment that I realized what it was in other people's eyes, of like, this kid just lost his dad in a very traumatic way. This family is broken, and that was like the big tragedy in our community for that whole period of my life. And
Mhm.
being on the receiving end of that was a very odd feeling, you know?
Yeah. It's very eye-opening. You start to have a lot of compassion, and you always think, I don't know, I mean, I would categorize both you and I as fairly compassionate and empathetic people, but I will say that this experience of losing your dad has made me more compassionate and more empathetic in ways
Hmm.
that I thought I was before. But,
It's
when
different.
you're going through it, yeah, you realize all the ways that maybe you need to be a little bit more.
And
Um,
I don't even remember. So I remember sitting down. I don't even remember the actual talk. I barely remember anything that was actually said.
I don't either. The only thing I do remember is that the person who gave the memorial service talk for your dad did an amazing job.
Hmm.
One of the best memorial funeral service talks I have ever been to.
Hmm.
And so many people who had been at his service had also commented, regardless of their faith, whether they were our faith or of a different faith, that it was one of the best funeral talks that they had ever been to. And
Yeah.
so part of me wishes that I had recorded it because I don't remember it either. I have no
Yeah.
idea. The one thing I was genuinely thankful for is that we were very involved in our congregation. And so the people there from our congregation, plus the person who gave his memorial service talk, knew him. They knew him. And so they were able to give it from personal experience, it was a really nice and comforting thing. It
Yeah.
wasn't generic, and there was genuine feeling and love and genuine like loss, for others as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I think I do remember the entirety of. I remember listening very intently because I didn't know what else to do. I don't remember much of what he said, but I remember most of what he said, made me even more, emotional and breakdown. Like I couldn't
Hmm.
keep it together whatsoever. Um, and and then I also remember having kind of a moment where I got lost in my own thoughts, of like, what comes next? Like, what do I do
Yeah,
from like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do at this
yeah.
point. Like, I don't know what the next few months of my life look like. The rest of the prospects of my life now look completely different, because
Hmm.
one of the most important people that has been there for me my entire life is now not gonna be.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure you felt similar, but
I it was interesting too. There's some of the things that really stand out for me as I remember being sitting like ramrod straight. So because again, we're in the front row in the middle, and I'm very thankful we had the closest people to us sitting next to us there, like our ride or dies, the people in our family who, were really close to us. In that row, they ask you like, who do you want us to save these seats for? And so we had the people around us that really we needed around us. But I do remember distinctly being very aware of the fact that there were like 300 people in this place. And as much as they were also grieving and paying attention to the service, they were also watching us.
Mhm.
And so it was I just remember not being able to relax. I remember I did take, anti-anxiety meds. I wasn't sure if I would have a panic attack or not. I didn't, but I just remember being very stiff and ramrod straight and like not able to relax. And so of course like that doesn't make for a comfortable time.
Mhm.
And then the other thing that really was interesting and stood out to me um is my best friend who we had talked about in another episode, um who is literally family. Like she has been in my life for 20 years at least. Um and her kids have been a part of our lives since they were born. And the oldest is 7 years younger than you. It's like little brother, right? And he was
Mhm.
sitting next to me, and I think he was sitting next to you. So it was like, or like in between us. I don't remember. I just
No,
remember.
you and I sat next to each other, and then I think on the other side of me was my best friend at the time.
But he was by us, so maybe
Mhm.
maybe he was sitting next to his mom, and she was sitting next to me, obviously. And he's oh gosh, I don't even know how old he would have been what, like 10 at the time or 11.
Yeah, yeah.
Um
Mhm.
and you know, we had moved away at that like we moved away when he was probably like 7.
7?
We had moved a couple hours
A
away. So like
Actually,
we
maybe
used
even younger than that.
yeah, we used to live literally 2 miles apart from them. So like were we were involved in each other's lives all the time. And,
Mhm.
at that age when you're a kid, it's like you do remember people, but like you don't remember people in the same sense. And so those kids were very close to Eric, but also in the last few years prior to his death, they hadn't seen him as much and they were still fairly young. And I just remember even my best friend, she was so surprised, even herself, because again, like he's, probably like 7, 10, I don't know, something like that. And he started sobbing. And that was something that was really impactful, and something that stands out to me. And I
Well,
think
those
also
kids loved my dad. I remember
right.
and a lot of it was always interesting, just a side point about him. Pa- Adults always felt very wary about him because they could never really get a read on like whether he liked them or not, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
that was just his social anxiety. Like
Mhm.
he was never like a warm person off the bat, but once he got to know you or you got to know him, like everyone was like, oh, I love that guy.
Yeah.
But
Kids
but
loved him
kids
immediately.
always yeah kids always loved him and like would gravitate towards him. We'd be at any event and all the little cousins, all of the little kids would like gravitate to him and play with him and like want to be around him, and just you just hear giggles coming from his direction all the time because he would play with them, and he would, you know even it was always weird because even, he was a big guy. He was fairly, a big guy, and he was usually pretty scruffy and like, um but little kids always like were never afraid of him. They were never like, put off by him or wary of him. They always wanted to just like go jump on him and be around him. I think that was part of that is those kids um would hang out with him. Like whenever we were over at their house or whatever,
Mhm.
he would play with them and interact with them. And And or when they came over to our house, same thing.
Yeah.
They would always, the little girl in that family as well, she always would gravitate towards him and talk to him and play with him and whatever.
Yeah. I think, and we're gonna, in the next episode, we're gonna tell you more about Eric so that you can
Mhm.
get to know him in the way that we knew him. And as we continue this saga, it'll start to
Mhm.
make more sense. But I do think that also the reason um, the little boy was crying is because he was so close to you too, and he saw
Mhm.
you completely falling apart. And I think
And we're still
it
very
really,
close.
oh, absolutely. And I think he just, it broke his heart to see you, someone who he viewed as an older brother. I mean, you're 7 years older than him. So, um,
Mhm.
you know, I think it really hit him like, oh my goodness, this is like a real thing. And
Mhm.
this person I care about, not only is gone, but the person I care about outside of that is like really hurting. So those are kind of the things that stood out for me. The other thing that really stood out for me in the service, besides it being like a really amazing service, even though I don't remember it, um, is the fact that I literally had to give 300 hugs that day. I have
Yeah.
never,
Oh, it's
I have never
uh
had to give so many hugs in my entire life. And of course, I appreciated them so much. I mean, I, at that point, was taking every ounce of love that anyone was willing to give me and comfort because I needed it, even though it didn't maybe always seem like it, maybe on the outside, but I desperately needed it. But, you have this sort of like receiving line, I guess, kind of, where people want
mhm.
to come up and like give you
Yeah,
their,
there were lines like going down the aisles of just people like lining up to come talk to us and give us hugs and stuff,
they
and
want to give you,
which was
yeah,
very
their
weird.
condolences.
Yeah, it was
Hmm.
very weird, but it also like you kind of just need to soak up the love, and like it was
It
very
touches your
comforting
heart.
to know.
It does.
Yeah, it was very comforting to know that we had all those people like in our court a little bit.
Yeah. So I can say, like, in within a very short period of time, I have given 300 people a hug. Like in like probably it probably took like 20 minutes, but I gave 300 people a hug, or they gave me a hug, I guess would be the better way to put it. Um
Yeah.
so that's another thing that I think is kind of funny about that, because
Hmm.
I don't think I've been hugged that much my entire life.
Yeah, that never would have happened post COVID, right?
Right? Oh my
Just
goodness.
so then after the funeral, they had like a little get together, eat food,
Which
look
is
at
very
pictures of
common
my dad.
for
And
for
I don't know what
most
that's called. I forget what that's called, but
it's like a
just like
luncheon.
the
It's like
dinner, yeah.
it's a post funeral luncheon typically. I think for most faiths that's pretty common to have some sort of time to break bread and connect with everyone who is grieving the loss. I do remember there not being enough seating for everyone in the space. The one thing I was a little bit disappointed on, I'm gonna say, is we had the corner with the photos for people to look at, and I had put a box there and had with a request, because I know you know this about your dad, but your dad had the funniest one-liners and like, or
Mhm.
like sayings, or like
Oh, he was a
dad
professional dad.
jokes. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
He
Yeah.
was
So like,
professional at making dad jokes and like, just saying off the cuff, out of pocket stuff, and he would and it was always like under his breath to where if you weren't paying attention and didn't catch it,
mhm.
like it would just go right over you. But most of the time, it was hilarious, and a lot of my
And
sense
it's,
of humor comes from him.
oh, for sure. And it's the one thing that I love that you inherited from him. Uh, but it was the one thing that everyone else really loved about him too. And everybody had a story about something he would say that just would make them die laughing. And I wanted those stories. I wanted those stories from people because I, even to this day, cannot remember outside of a couple of things the stuff he used to say. And maybe
Mhm.
it'll come back. I know that like for my grandma, your great grandma, I think she was on year 7 when she said that, like, the memories really started coming back for her. So I hope and I pray that that is true. But like
Mhm.
I don't remember those things, and it's not like I kept a log of the
Mhm.
funny things your dad said. And so I just remember having like a box on that table with the pictures with a little note that said like share the funniest story or like your funny memory of Eric. And there were like 2 people that left one. I
Mhm.
kept them. I mean, I didn't keep the actual notes. I took pictures of them because I would just lose
Mhm.
the notes, but I kept those. I cherish them. I wish more people would have done it. That was the one thing I was a little bit disappointed about.
Yeah, and I think I remember a lot of the types of things that he would say. Well, a lot of the types of things that he would say that I do remember, I should say, are things that I picked up on and started saying myself. And so
Right.
like, and so that's kind of the bigger thing is like
Yeah.
I picked up a lot of those mannerisms and a lot of those like little one-liners and out of pocket
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
stuff to say,
It was the
but even still
stories I wanted. It
yeah,
was the stories I wanted. Yeah.
there's so much more that he said that like I don't remember and I wish that I did. I wish I had record of them. And those are like
Yeah.
kind of those are always like the little quirks and little idiosyncrasies that you love about somebody is the
Mhm.
just the little things that you never really take as much note of, you don't really write
You
them
take it
down
for
or you don't.
granted
Yeah,
because you don't
exactly.
expect that they're going to be gone.
Right.
So,
Not the I
note to self, everyone. Like,
mhm.
if there are things that you really genuinely appreciate about someone, like, make a note about it because you never know when you'll want that reflection.
Well, and with that thing, it was a really, beautiful service, memorial service, and the luncheon thing was great too. A lot of people came together for us and
There was a little
made
drama.
homemade made homemade food. I don't remember what are you referring to here.
Um, so as there wasn't a lot of seating because there were way more people than we expected to show up. So the place that we had the food afterwards, there wasn't enough like tables and seats for people to sit down. And we obviously had gone through the food line. Everyone brought food, like the people that coordinated it. The food was amazing. Um, but we sat down and have food. Well, of course, as we get there, so again, we had to hug 300 people. So everyone left and they're already, and I believe the place that we had the after the luncheon at was like a good 20 minutes away. And so we're the last people to leave because we had to hug everyone and then we get going. So we're the last people to arrive to this luncheon. Um, so we're getting our food. And of course, it's not like we get to get food right away and go sit down. Like there's everyone wants to talk to you. They want to talk to you. They want to hug you. They want to ask you what happened, like all this stuff. So then we finally get food and you're kind of exhausted this time. Again, you're also soaking up the support. So don't get me wrong. Like you're there's an appreciation that comes with that. But it is exhausting because you're on. You have to be on. You're on. You're also giving energy to people. And um there were no seats available for you and I to sit down. There were a couple of seats available by the people
Sporadically.
that well no there were like a few seats that were open by the people that you and I would have sat by. It was Eric's family, um our grandma, etc. And you go to sit down, and then I think I came a little bit after because you told me about this. um but it was my mom and her new husband apparently had saved their seats there with her purse under the table. So, like, nobody knew that somebody was quote unquote sitting at those seats. There was nothing there. It's not like there was plate of food or anything like that. It was completely empty. But her purse was right under there.
Mhm.
And instead of just being like, of course, these guys are like experiencing the most horrific thing in their life that's ever happened. Let me just grab my purse and we'll go stand or walk or find somewhere else to sit or do
Oh,
whatever.
I do remember this a
So
little
you
bit.
tell this because you were the person that had the interaction
It's very
with.
vague, so I might be off on my memory because this was again over 5 years ago now and
We don't
whatnot. But
remember details with everything completely.
I
Anyways, we've
think
already explained that.
I sat down next to my dad's family
Hmm.
and started eating, and yeah, your mom's husband, who like we had
New husband,
not
like
not no I had barely, I think I met the guy one time,
they'd
and
only
I
been they'd only been married for like not very long because my parents got divorced when I was like 36 and I was 37 when your dad died. So like
yeah.
it's not like we knew this person very well.
Right, and I think I had met him one time, and I kind of had gotten a weird vibes from him, and
Yeah.
to say the least. And
Hmm.
yeah, I sat down and was talking with my dad's family, and he goes and he's like, "Oh, that's my spot," and I was like, "What?" And he basically was like, I had saved that spot, like I want to sit there," and I was kind of caught off guard. I was like, I didn't realize that somebody was sitting here, like there wasn't any indication or whatever, and he like, he basically made a big deal out of it,
He's like,
and
no, your grandma's purse is under the table.
yeah, something like
Like
that.
we're
But
supposed to know that.
and I was like, I didn't really know what to do because I'm just like, okay, I guess I'll get up and go, but like
You didn't
also,
actually.
well, I don't, yeah.
No, you. So this is what you did, which for me, I think this was very indicative of I think the person that we raised is you're a kind person, but you're not a pushover, and even at 17. And in that moment, that situation was just really inappropriate in
Oh no,
general.
yeah, I do remember. I remember. I kind of like told him off. I was like,
Okay, in
go ahead.
a normal person, right? A normal person in that situation would be like, oh my goodness, of course, you guys sit here. There's nowhere else to sit. Like, you have literally just experienced the worst thing that can possibly happen to anyone. It would be a non issue, a non question, a non anything. But no, what happens is, and like, yeah, you tell them because again, you're the one that had the conversation.
Yeah, so he was making a big deal out of it, and I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but I basically was like, "Do you not recognize that like my dad just died and this is his funeral and like I'm trying
And
to
this
sit
is
with
his
his
family.
family?"
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like trying to sit next to his family. Like I didn't realize that you saved a spot, but also sorry to play this card, but like my dad just died. Like and
And
I don't know you.
you were also saving a seat for me because it was like two seats because it was, again, saved by my mom's purse and it was him and my mom. They were getting food and it seems it's not like we're trying to be petty or anything like that, but it was just one of those moments. And I think it's just that's a very, very small glimpse into the type of stuff that I've dealt with. Um, very small, but yes, that was one of those things where I was just like, seriously, really,
Well,
like really.
and everybody else who was sitting there kind of noticed this, and I
They did
remember,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I remember it was just kind of one of those moments of like, who are you and why are you even here? Like I didn't know him. He never had even met my dad. And quite frankly, like I don't think you or I really were very fond of him in general, even in the few interactions we had with him. And then
Yeah.
he goes and tries to pull that stuff, and it's
No.
like do you have no respect for the environment that you're in or what's going on, or like
No
any
social awareness.
any
No.
awareness as to like what this situation is? And again, on one hand it's like, okay, yeah, you could I don't know. It's just it feels weird to be the one. It feels weird to like point it out and be like, "Are you serious right now?" Like, playing the
Right.
having to play the card of like, "This is my dad's funeral," and like I'm trying to sit with his family
Yeah.
and like my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and you who doesn't know any of them or didn't know my
Yeah.
dad and
Yeah.
obviously don't know who I am is like trying to make a big deal of where we're sitting at this luncheon. Like, anyway, the other thing, kind of in the same vein of like people saying or doing things that are just
Weird.
weirdly like, well, not weird, but like just almost inconsiderate,
Mhm.
is I had one lady come up to me who I didn't recognize. I had never met her, as far as I knew. Um, but she came up to me like before I had even walked in the building, and she said something along the lines of like, and I remember this like irked me very clearly because of all of the confusion around his death and like all of the unknown, and then you know kind of the things that we had been going through in the months leading up to his death. And I remember she said to me like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that my dad died when I was 17 too, and
Oh
so
yeah, you said this last. Yeah.
I know exactly what you're going through. I know exactly how you feel." And I was just like, I obviously was polite and just like, because I know what she meant.
Yeah.
I know she
Yeah.
just meant to kind of try to empathize with me and whatnot. But it was also one of those things of like, you have no idea how I feel.
No,
You have
I know.
like, yeah, you might have been through the same thing, but like, it is impossible to quantify or to know how somebody else feels in that situation um, because you're not them. You don't have that same relationship they did with their loved one. Like
Yeah.
and framing it like that, you can say, I understand what you're going through. I went through something similar, so I can empathize with you, or something along those lines. But just the way she worded it, and ultimately I shouldn't, like, I know that's not what she meant, and so like I don't mean any like, I don't hold it against her as a person or anything. It was just the way that she said it was just like, why did
Yeah.
you have to say it that way? Because you don't
Yeah.
know how I feel. Like,
Yeah.
you really don't.
And I think to clarify for everyone who is listening or watching, we're not like picking apart people or trying to like be negative in any sort of way. I think the goal in telling this story is to give you a really raw and unfiltered look at how you feel as it's happening and the things that come up. And these are all things that I'm sure that I have done and said to other
Mhm.
people as well in situations like this. And I don't, it comes from a good place. So it's not, maybe not the situation at the luncheon. I mean, that was a different situation, but it's not to point out and to be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe people were trying to comfort us, because like that wasn't it. But I think it's just also really just, we want to be honest with you. Like, these are the things that are going through our head and like what we're experiencing in that moment. We recognize that the intention is good. We recognize that the place it's coming from is good. But also in that situation, we're dealing with this incredible life altering tragedy. And, we're human. We're allowed to have these emotions. We're allowed to be like upset or annoyed or feeling however we feel.
Well, and that's the thing too, is it's like I said, looking back and even just thinking about it from a different perspective, it's like, obviously, I appreciate what she was trying to do, and like I appreciate her as a person for even just coming up and trying to comfort me in any way. Like, that takes a first of all, in that situation, that takes a lot of like guts, because most people, would rather just ignore it or like not bring it up because they don't want to cause those types of feelings, which
Mhm.
I would rather somebody come up to me and then say something that's a little bit off and me feel like, well, you could have said that better, but like I still very much loved and appreciated the effort.
Yes.
more so than what she actually said.
We
It
did
was more
with
so just that moment of like
it hit wrong.
re- well, yeah, remembering it in the moment and how I felt,
Yeah.
because at funeral, just gone through the worst week of my entire life, and like I didn't know this person whatsoever, and then it landed wrong because my
Hmm.
emotions were already
Yeah.
so on high, and then to hear like, you know I know everything you're going through, and I was like, you don't even know who I am, like you barely
Yeah.
even know my name, let alone to know what I'm going through. It was just like, in that
Yeah.
moment, it irked me. But
Yeah. I think that's part of though why we're again, it's normalizing human emotion. There's nothing wrong with the fact that that landed wrong for you. You were
mhm,
in an emotional state where that comment wasn't going to land right. It doesn't matter who it was that said it. It wasn't going to land right because of what you were dealing with. And so also I think it's just giving ourselves or giving you people who are listening or watching permission to like just be human, because I know for me that's something that I've struggled with my entire life. I'm getting better at it, but I grew up in an environment where I often felt like I wasn't allowed to just be human and have normal emotions like human beings. And so I think it's important to talk about those things, not in a way to make it be like somebody did something wrong, but to be like, yeah, this is a normal human response in these situations.
this is something that happened, and this
Hmm.
is how it impacted me in that moment.
Yeah.
And like I said before, like, when you look back at some of those moments, when you're not in that emotional state, which I
Yeah.
think is part of the biggest thing about communicating with family or friends or loved ones or whatever, is it's okay to have those emotional moments. The important part is to always, if is if something does upset you, or if something did irk you in the
Lands
wrong way,
wrong.
is
Yeah.
yeah, is to be able to go back when you're not in that emotional state and communicate about it, of like, hey, I know you didn't mean it this way, or I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt to assume that you didn't mean it this way, but when this happened, this is how it impacted me, this is how it made me
Hmm.
feel in that moment,
Yeah.
just to help, because that allows people to understand you better, but it also allows you to understand them better and understand where they were actually coming from, because most of the time we misinterpret those things, like I said.
99% of hurt feelings come from miscommunication. It
Right.
no I would say that majority of the time people do not have intentions to make somebody feel bad or to hurt their feelings.
Well,
There are
even in
the
that.
occasional people that do this on purpose, but
Right.
but most people are not intentionally trying to do it. So by going and making that loop and closing the loop and being like, this is how it landed for me, and the reciprocating side of it is for the person who's getting that feedback is to be able to say, I am so sorry that what I said made you feel that way. That was really not my intention.
Right.
And then
And
leaving it
not
at
get
that.
defensive.
Well, and
Yeah.
leaving it at that and allowing that moment for it to absorb before you jump into like, here's what I meant, or this is how I was going to say it, or like, this is what I was trying to communicate, because then it sounds like you're just
Right.
excusing the fact that the feelings were hurt. And the reality is whether you're right or you're wrong, if you hurt somebody's feelings, you should, nobody, like, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Even if I don't feel like what I said necessarily was wrong, I don't, I'm going to feel bad for the fact that what I said hurt somebody. I don't want to
Hmm.
hurt people.
Right.
So, so like I think people sometimes think that like it's easy to get defensive to be like, yeah, but I wasn't technically wrong. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is, if you care about me, it did hurt my feelings. I just need you
Hmm.
to recognize that.
It's a humility thing. It's like,
Mhm.
if somebody comes to me and says, hey, you did this thing and it really upset me, you know the fact that somebody would come to me in the first place and give me the benefit of the doubt to say, I don't, by coming to me and saying that, says that I don't think that you did this on purpose, but I still want to let you know this is how it impacted me. Not only
And
gives me the know of like, okay, obviously like they know that I didn't have any bad intentions, or they're trying to suss that out or whatever. But I then have the opportunity, the invitation to come up and say, you know, that is not how I meant it to come across. That's, and then it opens that dialogue again
mhm,
for a level of healing and to hopefully bring those two people closer. Um,
exactly.
but, in that event too, like even with your mom's new husband and in that situation, I don't even know if he really recognized who I was, or
Probably not.
like I don't even think he really realized that like
I
it
don't
was
even
my
know if he
dad's
met you.
funeral.
I was gonna say I don't even know if he had met you at that point. I mean,
It
I've
might have,
barely met him.
like I said, I might have met him one time. I don't even really know, cuz like I
Mhm.
don't have a relationship with your mom either, whatsoever,
Yeah,
for a lot of reasons. But so even in that situation, in the moment, it was very upsetting because it's like, do you not understand what's going on in this situation?
and
But
I
at the
think it
same
was
time,
upset. Yeah, I think it was upsetting and irritating also because of who it was, but
mhm,
also I do recognize that there was a pretty good chance that he did not know who you were because
yeah,
I
right,
don't honestly know it. You may have like met him in passing, but I don't know that you actually
right,
because I didn't have a relationship with my mom. So like it's not like even I really spent time with him. So
right,
I get the situation. It's just one of those irksome things. Again, we're talking about again our experience and the things that stood out to us and the stuff that,
mhm.
really kind of
Well, and
landed
again,
in some parts.
it's a dialogue of, taking people through the day by day of, these are kind of the range of emotions that we felt in this time, and that's
Hmm.
okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that, because you only ever see the world through your own worldview, right? And so
Yeah.
having being able to discuss like, this is how I interpreted all of these events in the
Yeah.
moment. Again,
This was
hindsight
our
is
worldview.
2020. Right, hindsight is 2020. Looking back, it's like, okay, that stuff really wasn't probably that big of a deal, but in the moment it felt like much more impactful.
Everything was super raw. So like any
Yeah.
any little thing is gonna it's gonna be a little bit more painful.
Well, and on that same front though, I think that's the thing that makes people afraid to try to comfort you
It
or to
is
try to
true.
say something, is
Yes.
because they're afraid of,
Mhm.
hitting that wound and making things worse. And I think,
Right.
you know, the thing that's important to remember about that is it's still more impactful for somebody to come up and try to say something and try to
Hmm.
be a comfort to you than it is for people to ignore you altogether. It's out
Exactly. Because
it's much worse when, you see people and you see them or hear them talking about you in the background, and
right.
that they're discussing what just happened to
Yeah.
you, but they don't have the guts to come up and actually
Yeah.
say something along the lines of, hey, I'm sorry, and I see, like, I had along those same lines, I had somebody at work the other day, um
Hmm.
that I was talking to, and she had mentioned to me that she had just lost her father,
Oh no.
in death, and she didn't know about it until like after the funeral and after all that stuff was done.
Oh
So her
wow.
family like decided not to tell her, or something along not my business to share. But um I just kind of told her like, hey, I'm really sorry you're going through that, and she kept saying, oh, it's okay, and I'm like, but it's not okay. It's not okay that
Yeah.
you're going through that, because
Yeah.
nobody should ever have to go through that, and yet we do. And I said, I kind of talked with her, and I was just like, in my experience, it's much better when somebody acknowledges what you're going through and gives you some sort of validation to say like, I see what you're going through, I see you, and I can validate that, like, whatever it is you're going through, even though I don't know, I still see it. And
Yeah.
I'm here in some way, even if I
Yeah.
don't know you, I'm still here and I still acknowledge it. Versus having somebody who doesn't ever acknowledge it to your face,
Yeah.
then you start to feel even smaller in that period because you start
Well,
to
you feel more isolated. It's not even smaller. You just
right.
feel more isolated because you're already feeling isolated. And I think
Hmm.
going back to kind of your original point is us sharing these experiences and some of the things that maybe landed wrong or hit us in the wrong vein at that moment isn't to discourage people from saying or doing anything. It really is just, again, to give you a specific, like to give the specifics of like what we were feeling and dealing with as
Hmm.
humans who had just experienced this incredibly horrific thing in our lives. Also, at the same time, like you said, we would much rather have had somebody come up and say something to us, even if it landed wrong, because in that
At
moment,
least they
even if it landed,
recognize that you're going through something.
and even in that moment, if it landed wrong, as you come out of it, you're able to go back and be like, I know they at least had the intention. Like the good
Hmm.
intention was behind it and they were
Hmm.
trying to comfort us. In the specific situation with the person who had said that to you, like you said, her intention was good. It wasn't intended to like make you feel worse.
Hmm.
It was intended to comfort you. I think part of our goal in talking about this stuff too is to help people understand like what is actually comforting and what's not
Hmm.
comforting. But
Right.
we recognize that when people come up and have said these things to us, that the intention was good and we appreciate that stuff. We appreciate it so much. And we still to this day have appreciated all of the love and the support that we've gotten over the years and we still continue to get today. I don't think people realize how impactful that has been. And and so, don't not do something because you're afraid it might not land right. Because ultimately, like those are the things that even if they didn't land right in the moment, we still go back and go, I just am so grateful that people cared and that they were
Hmm.
trying to make us feel better.
Right. Well, and kind of like I was trying to touch on before, it's more comforting to be able to recognize that people see you and see what you're going through, even if they have no idea what it is, or they can't really empathize or whatever. Feeling seen and heard is better than feeling ignored and isolated, even
Hmm.
if people don't say the right thing.
Yeah.
And in those moments when you lose somebody, you need as much love and support as you can get. And though nobody can take that pain away, they can, a friend of mine recently said, like, they like to have people over for dinner and just be like a support system. And they're like, I can never take away what you're going through, but I can be here and I can listen to you.
Hmm.
And we can have a good time together. And I can it's just an effort to say, I'm here.
Hmm.
I'm here. And that goes much farther than actually having to do anything. I had another friend of mine say, like, oh, um, I don't feel like I'm as good of a friend to you as you are to me. And I was like, what makes you say that? Like,
Yeah.
you've always been there. You've been there for me. You've helped me through things, even just by being somebody who listens to me. That's more
Yeah.
impactful than having to do anything necessarily quantifiable. It's not quantifiable to be
Right.
somebody who just listens and is there,
Yeah.
you know?
So one of the things that's very interesting about this whole process is, and we alluded to it in the introduction episode, that people have sort of a certain understanding of or a perception of what they think grief is like, and they um, also have life. They have their own life that they have to live through. It's not even when they're impacted personally, like family members, etc. They still to a certain extent go back to their life, right? Like our lives have turned upside down because this person was an integral part of our everyday life. But what was so interesting is especially in the first week from the time that we found out that something had happened to Eric, until the funeral, which was about a week later, there was so much support and love coming through. And not like support and love. I mean, people have supported and loved us up until this day. So I'm not talking just like, that, but there was so much, there were people around, there were people helping us with things.
We were never really left alone.
We were not alone.
People stayed at our house. People were, helped us with our chores. People were
Yeah,
coming through the house all the time just to see how we were doing and like
as
to be
people
with
do.
us. And then after the funeral, that all
It,
kind of went away. Like
it pretty
it still
much,
happened from time to time, but it was a very sharp like drop off in that.
it was a very sharp drop off, which was, I mean, it was understandable. It's not like we
Mhm.
expected people to completely alter their whole lives for us. But when you're used to not, like, all of a sudden when you're not having to be alone with yourself during this time where really you kind of want to avoid what's going on, and then all of a
Mhm.
sudden all of these distractions go away, and it wasn't even that it went away, it was that it was like very clearly like, okay, the funeral's done.
Mhm.
um it was a very interesting experience to all of a sudden. And again, it's not to say we didn't have support, because we had amazing support and we had people in our congregation that were extremely supportive. We had family members that were extremely supportive. We had close friends that were extremely supportive. It's just that the it goes from being like a 24/7 type of support in that first week to, okay, the funeral's done. It should be good, like,
And the world moves on,
and
and
the
then
world moves on.
and the hardest part is the world starts to move on, and that's the point where now you have to start to pick up the pieces and figure out what you're doing with, how your life is going to look from here on out. And the moment I think I touched on that in kind of in the intro episode too, but the moment that it's kind of like when you have a bunch of people at your house and you're having a good time,
Yeah.
and then like it reaches that point in the night and everybody kind of leaves, and you do the Minnesota goodbye, at least where we're from, and you kind of walk them out, and like you walk them to the door, and then you stand at the door for 10 minutes and talk more, and then everybody
It's a
leaves
real
finally.
thing.
All right, everybody leaves finally, and you shut the door and you turn around, and like for me, I'm left with an empty apartment, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it got real quiet all of a sudden. But
Yeah,
that's
that's
so
very
much.
much how it felt.
Right, and but it's so much worse because now you have to face the reality of what you're going through by yourself. Because in reality, you are by yourself. Like
Yeah.
when you're going through that sort of thing, your experience with it and all of that stuff is your own, and no one else
Mm.
can guide you through it. They can be there as a support, but like you're really going through that sort of thing internally by yourself, and you're left
On
with your
your
own
own.
emotions, your own thoughts,
Yeah.
and it's just a void,
And I
you
think
know.
that's the thing we'll talk more about in general is it was very different for you and I
Mhm.
because of the things, well, again, because we had different relationships with your dad, but also, and different losses, but also because of the things that I was dealing with in that first year versus the things that you dealt with right after it happened. And so that, things kind of drop away and you're left with your own thoughts and having to deal with things. I know for me, I was very much still in like that shock mode and crisis manager, like, and we'll talk more about it, but the stuff with the autopsy and the life insurance and like all this stuff, like it was just incredibly intense and insane, the things that I had to deal with, um, and wrap up just to ensure that I was able to take care of our family after
Mhm.
your dad died. And that we were entitled to. um, so, and then were able to spend a little bit more time just kind of focusing on grieving. And my grief really didn't hit me until a lot later, which really impacted, I think, our relationship on some levels because
Yeah.
it was a very different experience for each of us. So,
Mhm.
yeah, so I don't know. We'll get more into that stuff, but I
Well,
think,
one more quick point I wanted to make that I had thought about before the episode, but I never quite got there is during that luncheon too. I remember, I do remember the support that was there was very impactful, both through the funeral and the luncheon. But
All of
I
it.
had one
Yeah.
moment during the luncheon where it all got so overwhelming,
Hmm.
where um, where I walked out and I had to go by myself, and I just left and like had to walk by myself, and I went on a walk, and um and people saw me walk out, and like nobody let me leave by myself. And that was s- as much as I wanted to go and just be alone, it was so much more impactful and so much more helpful that people just were like, no, no, we're going to be with you. And even if you don't want to talk, I'm still here. I'm still a
Yeah.
body that is present. So you're not alone. And that was something that really stood out to me in terms of the support system we had is like, um, that's a great way to, in my opinion, support somebody is like, I think people recognized that I was overwhelmed and that I needed to get out of that environment,
Yeah.
but they still realize the importance of not letting me isolate myself.
Hmm.
And I think that that's an important lesson for me, when I see other people going through things, but just in general, like isolating is one of the easiest ways to just sit in it. And sometimes for some reason, us as humans like to just sit in the sorrow for a while
Well,
and
you
feel
need
sorry for
to.
ourselves.
You do need it to a certain extent to process it.
Yes, but sometimes it can get into a loop for
Right.
people
And that's where
where
you have to.
that process never ends.
Yeah.
And and it's okay to sit with your feelings and to feel sorry for yourself and what you're going through and to really just sit in the sadness for a bit. That's why we all kind of like sad songs sometimes when we're feeling it. You want to turn on the
Right.
sad songs, but having somebody there who prevents you from actively isolating, because that's what I was doing. I was trying to isolate myself because I didn't want people to see me be vulnerable. I didn't want to be vulnerable around other people. And for people to follow me out and to show me and to basically show me through their actions that, hey, it's okay if you're vulnerable. I'm here. I'm not judging you. I just want you to know that you are cared for. And that is
Right.
huge for somebody going through something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I think we do need to wrap this up. And in the next episode, I think the goal is to talk about my dad and what we loved about him, and give you guys a little bit more perspective into what this amazing person was like and what he ended up going through prior to um, his death.
I think, yeah, what we're going to talk about next is really going to give you the context to the mystery that and the things that we were a little bit concerned about or the things that we were speculating about in terms of his death. And actually, really contributed to a lot of things that have happened afterwards since his death. So, um, yeah, so we'll talk to you guys next time.
Hey, you know how this works.
If you like this episode or just like us in general, you can find us at It's Going Podcast on all the things.
Don't forget to check out the links in the description.
And thanks for hanging out with us.